y'all, it's Jen. In this video, I talked about my layoff from a startup, and one of the most received comments I had was, how did you find a job so fast? I ended up with 3 offers within 2 months of being laid off, and these offers were with mid-sized tech companies and offers that I would have been super happy to receive back when I was initially leaving Amazon in 2022. In part 1 of the series, I talked about all my job search tips that landed me an interview, and in the second video, I will be talking about how I approach the different phases of the interview process and how to set the stage for comp negotiation when you receive an offer later on. I will actually go into detail for salary negotiation, specifically in this layoff market, in a third video. So make sure you subscribe to know when that one comes out, and let's get started. This is something you will need in your back pocket for each stage of the interview process, whether it's a recruiter call, hiring manager interview, or the full loop. In a crazy competitive market with so many other qualified people who are also laid off, you may have to polish this way more than when you were job hunting before 2022. Surveys show that 25% of interviewers make their hiring decision within the first 5 minutes of talking to a candidate. And seeing that your elevator pitch will pretty much be that length, you have to make it good. Here are my tips for an effective answer to a tell me about yourself. Number 1, give a snapshot of your work history. They're not wanting to hear anything personal, and you don't want to do a repeat of your resume line by line here, but what you need to do is give an engaging, compelling, clear, and complete summary through providing snapshots of your work history. You want to format each snapshot to include information about which company you worked for, what title you had, and the key accomplishments. Each one should be no more than a few sentences, and the total pitch should probably be about 3 minutes or so, and certainly under 5 minutes. Number 2, make sure your snapshots are achievement-oriented. In these mini snapshots, make sure you're framing your responsibilities in the form of accomplishments. Don't waste any part of your pitch simply describing the responsibility anyone with that position title could have had, but focus your points on situations where you're able to save time, money, or produce any kind of quantifiable result for the company. Number 3, tie it back to the job. My last tip for your elevator pitch is to have a sentence or two at the end tying back your experience to why you are a good fit for this role. Before this layoff market, and there was way more demand than supply, I didn't really need to do this, but in this market, you just want to make sure your case is as strong as possible. Have something at the end that directly ties all these mini snapshots you've given of your work history in one sweeping statement back to why you're applying for this position and why you're a good fit. Make sure you perfect this pitch. You will definitely be giving this at least 3 times, if not 5 or 8 times during the entire interview process. Each interviewer will provide their feedback at the end in the debrief without going into too much detail, and their first impression of you will always be impacted by this. So spending some time to get this right will really go a long way. Let's move on to the recruiter conversation. This conversation is gold. It's the first step to any interview, and not only does it allow you to set the tone for comp negotiation later on, but also lets you learn more about the role itself and give both the recruiter and you the information needed on whether you should move forward. Here are my do's versus don'ts for a recruiter conversation in this layoff market. Don't be the first one to reveal any numbers when they ask the question, what are your salary expectations? When you've been laid off and seeing everyone around you being laid off, it's tempting to want to adjust your salary expectations to fit whatever job that's remotely close to your qualifications, especially if you're in need for a visa or other pressing circumstances. But there's really no need to do that. I'll talk about this in more detail in the salary negotiation video, but from my own experience, the numbers have not changed too much from when I first looked at the beginning of 2022 for both large and mid-sized tech companies, at least from the ones that I interviewed at. And I was also able to negotiate both of the offers that I got to be outside of the upper end of the band as well. Instead of revealing your current salary or ideal number when asked about your salary expectations, you should always say something in general to punt it back to the recruiter, like, I would love to understand the different components of the comp package for this position at company ABC. Almost 10 out of 10 times, it would actually just answer this question instead of asking you back. Especially in this layoff market, I actually feel like recruiters are even more motivated to just be upfront right off the bat because they have a budget, they probably have to stick to it, and they don't want to waste time interviewing candidates who won't take the final offer at the end. There's still room for negotiation though. You just don't want to be the first person to give that number. At this stage, I would also go a step further and directly ask what level is this position in the company and what the band is. There's always a band because where you fall on it would depend on how well you interview, and the band they give you will be in terms of total comp, broken down into different components of sign-on bonus versus equity versus salary. When they tell you these numbers, you should already know whether this makes sense or not based on the due diligence you should have already done with resources like Blind or Levels.fyi. This is just setting the stage for comp negotiation later on, and I will talk more about this in detail in my next video. Do ask about the reporting chain. Get the specific name of the hiring manager and LinkedIn search their experience. Usually LinkedIn also suggests on the side all the people they work with in the same team at org, so you might be able to get a flavor of what your potential future teammates do as well. And as a bonus, if they updated their current job description at this company, you can also use that to your advantage in the interview process to tie your experience in that way. When I was interviewing for a general PM position at a large payments tech company, the title was super general and so was the job description. I actually ended up learning a lot from LinkedIn stalking the hiring manager and finding out other PMs that reported to him and what they did. I leveraged that information in my interview and it was really helpful. Do ask about the history of this role. With how many layoffs are continuously happening in tech companies of all sizes, you really want to have some information about the potential job security of this particular role. Is it a newly open position, which also means the budget recently got approved? Is this a backfill for a role that's essential to the team? And what's the urgency for hire? This not only gives you valuable information, but also helps you with salary negotiation later on if you know this is an urgent or pressing project that they need to hire for right away. This is usually the second step in the interview process where the recruiter has decided you could be a good fit and they pass along your resume to the hiring manager who also agrees and decides to meet with you. Here you have a chance to drop your elevator pitch again at the beginning of the call. And in general, the hiring manager will have about 2 to 3 behavioral questions that are asked in a 30 or 45-minute span, so they could decide whether you could be a good fit for the team and whether you should proceed to a full loop. There are 3 takeaways you want a hiring manager to have by the end of your conversation together. Number 1, you have the relevant experience to succeed in this role. Number 2, you're someone they want to work with. Number 3, you did your homework on the role. You have the relevant experience to succeed in this role. They only have time to ask 3 questions at most with a limited amount of time. So you want to tie back each question they ask on how it's relevant to the current role you're applying for. A question about how you deal with conflict as a software engineer will be answered super differently and evaluated differently than how you deal with it as a product manager. Use the SMART framework as always, and make sure you're pulling a situation that's as relevant to the job description as possible. You are someone they want to work with. Bring positivity energy to a job interview is especially important in this layoff market. Everyone's probably worried about their jobs, and a candidate's demeanor could be a make or break more than ever in addition to the hard skills. You always want someone positive and friendly to be joining your team, and if it's going to be 2 people with a similar set of technical skills, they will certainly be picking the person with a more personable demeanor. You did your homework on the role. Last way to make yourself stand out is by doing homework on the company and utilizing information you got from the recruiter, your own research, or even the first information from the first few minutes talking with this hiring manager to ask meaningful questions to the hiring manager. This is already giving them a sense of you being invested in doing a good job for this position. The layoff question. In the hiring manager interview, another common question is, why are you interested in this role? When you've been laid off and want to answer this as honestly but also as strategically as possible, you're left to wonder how to phrase your response. For me, if the question to me was, why are you interested in this role? I've never felt compelled to mention layoff as my primary motivation to search, but rather I talked about how stability is very important to me in this economy, which is why I am specifically looking for roles that I have direct relevant experience in and will excel at. In an effort to keep the conversation organic, I like to stay focused on why I would be a strong candidate for this role, so that answer is not only honest, but also emphasizes again my fit to hiring manager. In the role that I ended up taking, my final round was with a C-suite exec, and she actually pointedly asked, wait, so why are you leaving your current company? And when I talked to her about my layoff, there was only understanding and no negative impact. I imagine with how common layoffs are right now, it would be the same for everyone's situations. All right, everyone's secretly all interested in the work-life balance question, whether you admit it or not, and no better person to gauge this from than the hiring manager. You can use the mass layoffs happening to your advantage and ask a question about how they're dealing with the tenseness around layoffs in the tech industry and how they've been managing team morale in the org. This should obviously come last after you already asked some role-specific and other meaningful questions, but I like touching upon things related to team morale or management style because the hiring manager's response is often really telling of the type of manager they are and how much they care about their employees. I can't stress how important this short hiring manager interview is because how much they like you here will directly impact, well, whether you move on to the full loop or not, but also how hard they'll go to bat for you later to fight for that final offer. Congratulations, you've made it past the hiring manager and you are now meeting with the rest of the team. This full loop usually consists of key stakeholders this role is expected to interact with regularly, where you will also have at least one peer on the same team interviewing you. Each interviewer on the full loop is essentially trying to answer these 3 questions in this order of significance. Number 1, do I like this person? Will the rest of the team like this person? Do they have the right skills to be good at their job? They will always be evaluating you in this exact order. So make sure you're intentional about establishing a connection with your interviewers and having that positive attitude we talked about earlier in this video. A big question everyone also has is, how bad is it to reuse examples across the different loops? The answer has to do with the way debriefs are done. I've been part of the interview loops for both Amazon and the startup I was at, and while we do jot down notes about the specific examples given by the candidate, a lot of the discussion that takes place during the debrief is just a verbal exchange across a group that is more informal than you think. I've seen some managers that just really like one particular candidate, while on paper I'm seeing the same examples being used across multiple people. So it's okay, as long as you're using a smart framework and tying different parts of the same experience to the specific question asked by a specific interviewer. Another key factor for acing your loop is really being intentional about establishing a connection with each person. That connection is done through not only speaking genuinely with confidence on your past experiences, but also tying in conversations you've had with the hiring manager and other people on the loop to show your active interest and enthusiasm for joining the team. If one person on the loop mentioned a challenge they've run into, bring this up to another interviewer and ask how they approached the situation or if their team has run into something similar. Things like this can really help build rapport in the short amount of time you have together and show your attention to detail. You also want to use this loop to really gauge for yourself whether you will be a good fit at this company. You should read the room and get a feel of the personalities of each interviewer. I like to specifically ask them also to just be brutally honest with me on things they want to change and things that they liked about their current team. Something about you specifically asking for brutal honesty really brings out some brutal honesty. Maybe I've also just had good luck coming across some very genuine interviewers, but I've had people dish me tea about the company that I just totally didn't expect. Next, it's worth it to make sure each interviewer is as impressed with you as possible, including the peer interviewer, because all of their feedback and how much they like you will feed directly into how much the hiring manager will want to go bat for you when it comes to time for comp negotiation. I've sat in loops before where a manager starts off with moderately liking a candidate to fully wanting them to join ASAP because of the feedback from the rest of the team. Alright, these are my top tips for interviews during this layoff market and setting the stage for comp negotiation for the offer stage later on. Please hit the subscribe button to stay tuned for part 3 of my video where I will talk about my approach to salary negotiations after being laid off and how to attack the comp package in parts. If you found this video helpful, please leave a comment below any other questions you have, and I'm sending you all the good vibes. I'll see you next time.